So we'll start in a few minutes, okay?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll start now.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I hope all of you are having a great day. We have something special lined up for you today. I welcome you all to the guest speaker session. We're honored to have a guest speaker, Mr. Jayan Jose Thomas, who is a professor of economics at IIT Delhi. Throughout his career, Sir has worked in different capacities across the world as an academician in economics. His research work through the years has been primarily focused on macroeconomics, planning, and economic development. His research and articles have been published in renowned media outlets like the BBC, the New York Times, Livemint, Hindu, and the Frontline. He has worked he has worked in academic roles across prestigious institutions like the University of Singapore, Indian Statistical Institute of Kolkata, Madras School of Economics, amongst many others. Sir is a native of Kerala and was a part of the Kerala State Planning Board. Good evening, sir. We're glad to have you with us today.
Hi. Hi. Thank you. Thank you all for this invitation, and I'm very happy to be part of this. I mean, I'm finding. I just read your. I just read the note that you sent to me. I find it very exciting that all of you, that young people, are organizing such an event. Very happy to be part of this.
Yes, sir. Uh, Before we move forward, would you like to share a few words with us, sir?
Uh, well, no, perhaps we can. I hope perhaps let me. Well, I don't have. I mean, I think we are going to speak about public
Yes,
sector, the
yes.
role of
I have a
public
few questions
sector.
lined up to ask you.
Yes. So I think it's a very, very important that you actually chose this topic for today's event. I think as a country, and this is what I'm going to also speak about. Uh, India in the 1950s, when it actually started planning and development, India was clearly one of the pioneers in among third world countries. And remember, these were all third world countries which were newly freed from colonialism.
Yes, sir.
India was a free country, and so were many other third world countries. So India was clearly one of the front runners in using government or state for planning and industrialization. Now, I think it's time we have. It's almost 70 years. It's time to kind of look back. I think it's been a mixed record. I mean, if you look at India's development trajectory in the post 1950 period, post 1947 period, and
Yes, sir.
compare it with what has happened in the previous 50 years or previous 100 years, clearly we have achieved a lot. But what we could have probably, where we could have, you know, could we not have improved? Could
Yeah.
our trajectory could have been even better than what we had already achieved. So I think that is what we can speak about.
Yes, sir.
And I would like to speak about whether can India become a technology leader,
Yes, yes.
and what should be the role of public sector or the government in making India a technology leader.
Yes, sir. I'll just ask you a few questions. Pretty simple questions, but yet, uh, little important about the topic as well. The first is, We have a Lok Sabha committee this year, and our agenda is publicly private. It's basically which deals with the privatization of public sectors, and I just wanted to get your views on what do you think of this as an agenda.
Yeah, like I think if I can make am I making a presentation, I can actually probably explain a little more on this.
Yes, sir. Yes, sure, sure. Yes,
So I don't know what is the format. If the format, so I have a prepared presentation. If I can just go through it, probably that
yes, sir. Sure, sure, sure.
maybe that might be better. If there
Yes,
can be
sure,
more
sure.
questions on that, shall I go through it? But
Yes, sir. Yeah, definitely.
and how much time do I have? I can. How much time can I spend?
I, you can be comfortable, sir. We don't have any
Because you
restriction as
wrote
such.
to
But
me in in your email, it was at 30 minutes, so I have a
yeah,
30-minute
30.
presentation, but I
Yes, sir.
can make it even 20-25 minutes if
Yeah,
that is
sure, sure.
fine.
Yeah,
So I'm going to share share the screen, right? Share
yeah.
screen. Yes, can you see my share my screen?
Yes, sir. It's come up.
Thank you. So, yeah, so I really want to ask this question: can India become a technology leader, and what should be the role of the public sector in that? I already mentioned that we have. I hope I am visible too. No.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you. We said India was clearly one of the pioneers in in development led by government and planning in the 1950s. But perhaps it's time to take stock. What have we achieved? Now it's a mixed record, like I mentioned. If you look at per capita income, um, you know there is much more that India could have done. Although there
Yes, sir.
has been huge improvement, China's per capita income, China and India, there were very similar levels of development in 91. But today, China is probably something like 2.4 times the Indian level in terms of per capita income. If you look at this table, you also find South Korea. South Korea is a country which has even grown much faster than India or even greater than China. So you have long term development starting at similar levels in 1960, but some countries doing much better than some others. So that's something which we have to understand why. Uh, Now it's not just economic growth, even in terms of actual human development indicators. That's how well we live. India can do much better. You know, so even compared to China, China comparison because we are very similar in terms of our population size, and like I mentioned, even till 90, even as late as 1990, these two countries were at similar levels of development. Uh, but even in terms of human development, if you look at say population for females with at least some secondary education, India is less than 40% in the latest year for which we have data. China's is
Sir. Yeah.
75%. I will skip. I will perhaps come back to the main question that you asked me to ask.
Yes.
Asked me to deal with, which is should there be a role for government? Because we know in economics, I don't know. I mean, you may not all be economists because I'm kind of this. I mean, I understand this is a mixed crowd. No, there
Yes,
are
sir.
students from different backgrounds. So, but I'm sure most of you may have heard this debate. Uh, the debate is which say on the one side you have a market-led economic development, which say that markets left to themselves are good enough for economic development. Uh, so free market, free trade, you leave the markets. I mean, it's essentially asking the government to leave the markets alone. So the government should not intervene in development. That's kind of argument. But remember, these ideas, many of the economic ideas developed in the Western countries. So how well do these ideas suit a country like India? That's something which we can understand. We should understand. Now, I mentioned East Asia, and I mentioned South Korea,
South Korea. Yes, sir.
which is part of East Asia. Now, because unlike the European countries or unlike the US, these are countries which started development only after 1950. And
Yeah.
uh, but remember, what would you think? I mean, if a country like Singapore, what is your idea? Is it market-led development, or is it government-led or state-led or public sector-led development? I mean, what
I
is the
think it was a
yeah, yeah,
market-led development.
yeah? That's what we always think, but the reality is quite different. Many of these East Asian countries, they are very much part of the global economy. They have made huge gains from globalization. But if you look more closely at their development models, we find that they are not entirely leaving everything to the market. There's a clear role of, you may say, the invisible hand of the government guiding economic development. Uh, I mean, I can come back to the now. In many ways, they actually go against the mainstream economic ideas. And what do you think of the mainstream? Where do you think the mainstream comes from? What is your impression? Uh, Typically, the mainstream economic ideas come from the developed world. I mean, and uh, I hope you may have heard about the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, just like you and you're talking about. No, it's another international body, uh, but with probably a more mixed record in terms of its, in terms of its contribution to global development. Why I'm saying mixed, because some of the recommendations that have come from these agencies, they are also called Washington institutions because they are based in Washington. Um, Although, I mean, they are not, they are international organizations. They're based, and also they're kind of hugely influenced by the, you know, by economists from the US, and the Western Europe. Now, what do they? So, what is the mainstream argument? The mainstream argument is that, I mean, countries should develop based on their comparative advantage. And what is this comparative advantage? What is the comparative advantage? Which essentially says, if you're a labor abundant country, your development should be based on labor intensive industries, and you should also try to maintain uh, your comparative advantage, and that can be done by keeping your wages low, and so that you continue investing in labor intensive industries. Is there a problem with such an argument? I mean, you can imagine that there is a problem with such an argument. I understand this event is being held at IIT Guwahati, and I'm actually speaking from IIT Delhi. Remember, these are institutions, or the IITs as institutions were begun way back in the 1960s, when India was a very poor country, a very poor, newly independent economy. And we were extremely, and we still are, a highly labor intensive, labor surplus economy. But it was clearly the vision of Indian planning to go for research intensive industries, skill intensive industries at the very beginning, and to invest in technology institutions such as the IITs, but also to invest in research institutions, in research in areas such as space or atomic energy and so on and so forth. So you actually went against the mainstream economic argument. In some ways, East Asian countries did the same thing. Uh, you know, Instead of getting relative prices wrong, I mean, instead of saying the mainstream argument or the IMF argument is that don't have subsidies, don't subsidize to industries, because ultimately subsidies are giving cheap capital in a labor surplus country. South Korea was a labor surplus country. South Korea is a poor country. But they went against it. They went against and built, provided subsidies or cheap capital to selected industries. And the government played a key role. Although much of the industrial development there, it was not in the public sector, but it was clearly industries where uh, the private sector, the industries were being developed by the private sector, but the government played a key role in shaping the path of industrial growth. Now, we think, I mean, I also already mentioned that the Western economies, the US, the Washington institutions, they all say, uh, don't go for market don't go for too much government. They all advise against government intervention. But if you look at what they have done, what the big economies have done, the Western economies have done, it's a very interesting study recently by Mariano Mazzucato. According to her, she said in the US, the government played a key role in the introduction of each of the new technologies, uh, including the internet, the nanotech industry, and so on and so forth. So essentially, what then, you know, I mean, if they are then telling the developing countries such as India or China not to have, not to subsidize your industries, not to provide research in the public sector, what they're essentially doing is they're actually kicking away the ladder. The ladder they used to climb to to reach the position that they are today, that is the economically superior position that they are today. It is by using all kinds of uh, all kinds of they actually protected the industries at the time the industries were being developed. The government helped these industries. So to tell developing countries that the government should not be involved is clearly not, uh, is there is a double speak there. So there's a double speak of the developed countries that we should understand. Now coming back to India, we know in India now there is a Indian economy. There's an employment crisis, and we should also understand why this employment crisis is happening. Part of it is both a challenge and an opportunity, and maybe I can show it with this. I can come back to it later. It is that there is a rise in working age population in the country. Now, at the same time, a generation back, many Indians, especially those in rural areas, they actually used to stay in the villages, and agriculture used to be the main source of employment. But now, increasingly, as you all know, there is increased migration out of the rural areas. The third factor is, rising enrollment in educational institutions, which means you have to create new employment in industries, in services. So, in fact, I have estimated that there is a deepening mismatch in India between those who are potential workers, given this increase in the working age population, given the exit out of agriculture. uh, in the period 2005 to 12, the potential workers, those who could have joined industry, construction, and services, was 14 million a year. But the country could generate employment only for 6.3 million a year, every year. Every year, new jobs. It could have been at the rate of 14 million, but our generation was at the rate of 6.3 million. In the more recent periods, the situation is even, if anything, getting even more difficult. The potential growth is at the rate of 17.5 million, but the actual employment duration is at the rate of 4.5 million, which means so there is a clear case problem of unemployment. And when it comes to women, there is also a case of women withdrawing from the labor force. Now, what is wrong? Where are things getting wrong? I mean, if you look at investment, and in fact, this is one clear indicator of how uh, of of any economies. Investment means investment in new factories, and perhaps I can use this graph: new factories, new buildings, new machinery. So you see here in India, our investment. Look at the blue line. The investment was rising till around 2011. After that, investment has been falling. Uh, in fact, we now know China is a major economically superior power. The main reason why China has reached where it is today is because it has continued to invest. In after 2008, we know there was a crisis in 2008. So after the 2008 financial crisis, also China continued to invest. So it's again, I can come back to it. Now coming back to India, uh, uh, you saw the you know in economics, again, like I said, there are these two debates. Economics is a subject where people like to debate all the time. So the one argument is that, look, again, India is a labor surplus country. We should keep investing in labor intensive industries. In fact, clearly, I mean, it's everybody agrees that. Um, but we also it also say that I mean, things like a minimum wage legislation or labor law, they can all. I mean, when you say you have to go by your comparative advantage, uh, you do not also want, I mean, if you do not want your wages to rise, uh, is that, I mean, that can that be a strategy for growth? Um, I perhaps I can come back to some of those issues later, because if how much time I have?
So you have another 10 minutes, sir.
Okay, yeah. I mean, so this is from Coimbatore, and I mean, when you talk about industry in India, because uh, a large, in fact, 80% of India's manufacturing workers work under conditions like this, where they work under conditions of extremely very poor technologies. And one reason why they are not able to actually upgrade their uh, their growth, upgrade their economic structures, is because of credit. I don't know how clear this graph is, but you
It's
can
just
actually is clear enough.
yes, sir, it's clear.
Thank you. You can take a quick look at the red line, how the red line is behaving. And the red line is about credit given to micro and small industries, or small industries, as a share of the total credit in the country. And the period from 91 to 2017, I have seen you talk about banking regulations, privatization of the banking sector, and so on. In fact, I mean, very quickly, the reason why in India actually went for nationalization of the banking system in the mid 60s is uh, because until then the banks were largely in the hands of a few large private houses, private business houses, and much of the credit uh, was being directed to these, I mean, to these big houses, as well as to the metropolitan centers. So one good thing that has happened, of course, there can be problems about efficiency and questions. There can be several questions, but one thing that has happened in India after 1965, and particularly after 1980, has been an increase in rural banking, increase in rural bank branches, increase in credit to agriculture, because it was also part of the nationalization project that small industries and agriculture should get a very large part of the credit. And that is why you see here, even in 91, 15% of the total credit given by banks was going to small industries, and an equivalent amount of was going to agriculture, which is in green, which is in blue. But you can see how it is coming down over time, which clearly reduces the capabilities of industry as well as agriculture, small agriculture. The point I wanted to mention earlier, how India is going to be so there is huge opportunity. The fact that working age population is going to increase not just in India but also in the rest of South Asia. Um, so clearly there is India and South Asia are going to be the source of future growth if only we have the right policies. Um, so now, I mean, like I mentioned, technology. So, I mean, in fact, I've actually talked about different things. So, one is that the banking system in India should be able to give more credit to small industries, but at the same time, we should also have technologically intensive industries. Now, one of the reasons why we are probably not doing as well as we should is if you look at the R&D spending. Again, this is from 96 to 2018. Uh, India's spending on R&D, research and development, as a percent of its GDP, out of every 100 rupee of Indian GDP, only less than 1 rupee is spent on research and development. The comparable figure for China is 2.14, US is 2.8, South Korea, which we saw earlier, was a country which grew very fast, is 4.5. I think, and probably the last point, I want to come to is, so it's not just banking, it's not just technology intensive industries, but also social sectors. There's a big role for the government in the social sectors. But again, this is one area where India hasn't really done very well. Even during the phase before 91, India's investments in public health and education were quite low. If you look at 2018, government spending on health was less than 1% in China compared to almost 10% in Cuba, or 8.5% in the US, or 3% in China. Amartya Sen, John Tress, I mean, these are people who have written a lot about India's underinvestment in the social sectors and its problems. So, if any of you are interested, you can always read their articles and books. But to say that there are, variations across Indian states. For instance, if you look at infant mortality rate, uh, Kerala has done much better than many other states. That is, number of children who die, before age one, I believe, per thousand live births, six in Kerala, which is the number is almost similar to the number achieved by the US. Tamil Nadu, the Indian average is 41 deaths. Tamil Nadu is 21, Uttar Pradesh is 64. Tamil Nadu is one of the states which have done relatively better. But in places where things worked, it is because of, again, government spending on social sectors, on health and education. You can see it for Kerala, uh, how, I mean, for instance, in 1980, early 1980, because this was the period much of the development happened. Uh, you know, the expenditure on social sectors as a proportion of total expenditure was close to 46% in Kerala. Almost half of the spending was on education and health, much greater than the average for India. Now, to end this talk, I say that India should should invest in technology intensive industries, labor intensive industries, and our future growth should not be in a way that reduces workers' wages. In fact, it should be in a way that increases prosperity. It should be in a very inclusive manner. So, I mean, typically people say, oh, you cut wages so that firms become profitable and there'll be more industries. But that is certainly not the way, because ultimately, if you're cutting wages, one, of course, you're doing a uh, that will be tragic for the workers, uh, the working poor. But ultimately, it is also not something which is good for the firms, for businesses, because it shrinks markets. So what we need in India is, I mean, we are a large country, but of a very, I think, more, largely poor people. That should change. So if there is more prosperity, if wages increase, if more people can buy more goods, that is actually the best way to develop our industries. The crisis we know in the economy, because of COVID and many other things, can be overcome by widening the sources of demand, by increasing the consumption of an investment for the poor. And in each of these, the public investment has a big role to play. We clearly need a development model that is dispersed far and wide across the country and not centered in a few big cities. We need new technologies that create employment, not technologies that tend to displace labor. I would end this talk. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Yes, so thank you for taking valuable time and coming here and sharing the knowledge with us. Uh, we hope to definitely look into these, and those who have interest, sir has already spoken about Amartya Sen and the other different economists who you can look into and do your research on. And with that, we'll end this talk here.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Subhadeep. Thank you.